The price of hubris. The RMS Titanic stood as a definitive testament to Victorian overconfidence, a massive engineering marvel that many believed had finally bypassed the inherent dangers of the natural world. On her maiden voyage, 2,200 souls boarded a vessel where safety protocols were treated as secondary to aesthetic luxury and speed. This structural negligence effectively transformed the ship into a massive steel trap, where the insufficient number of lifeboats meant that class status directly determined a passenger's chance of survival. When the hull breached, the North Atlantic flooded the compartments at a lethal 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, the water causes immediate physical paralysis, forcing the respiratory system to fail long before the heart stops. Modern forensics suggest the ship snapped under the immense stress of its own weight while still partially buoyant. Resting at 12,500 feet, the wreckage remains a silent witness to a grim reality. Our most advanced technologies are often vulnerable to the simplest human errors and the weight of our own pride. The timeline of agony. Tragedy is most potent when it strikes during a mundane moment. In 79 AD, the residents of Pompeii were going about their morning unaware that Mount Vesuvius was breathing a column of ash 21 miles into the stratosphere. This wasn't a slow lava flow. It was a pyroclastic surge traveling at 450 miles per hour. When the heat hit, it didn't just burn, it triggered a thermal shock so violent that internal moisture turned to steam, causing immediate and catastrophic cranial failure. Today, the plaster casts of the victims aren't just artifacts, they are permanent screams frozen in volcanic debris. Fast forward nearly 2 millennia to a clear Tuesday morning in New York. The transition from a coffee run to a global nightmare happened in a heartbeat. Both events share a chilling psychological DNA, the illusion of permanence shattered by a sudden, violent sky. We look at the ash-covered figures of Pompeii and the dust-caked survivors of Lower Manhattan and realize they are mirrors of the same vulnerability. History doesn't just repeat, it rhymes in the way it turns a crowded resort or a financial hub into a graveyard before the victims can even blink. Decoding the unanswered. Tragedy frequently erases our collective memory, performing a slow-motion lobotomy on human intellect. The great Library of Alexandria didn't vanish in a single cinematic blaze. It suffered a centuries-long erosion of knowledge. We mourn 500,000 lost scrolls, yet the true horror remains the technological dark age that followed. Had those manuscripts survived, humanity might have conquered the stars 5 centuries ago. Instead, we inhabit a void in our species' resume, a cold case fueled by religious dogma and political neglect. This same haunting silence echoed in 2004 when the Indian Ocean floor ruptured with primordial fury. The magnitude 9.1 earthquake displaced enough water to alter the Earth's rotation and permanently shorten our days. Across thousands of square miles, the sea didn't simply rise. It stole the land without a single warning siren. Animals fled to higher ground hours early, sensing a frequency humans had grown too civilized to hear. We track coins from satellites, yet watch 230,000 people vanish because of a missing sensor. This represents the paradox of progress. We possess the data to explain the ruin, but lack the wisdom to stop it. When humanity hit zero. In 1984, the city of Bhopal became a stark example of the cost of industrial deregulation and corporate malfeasance. Inside Tank 610, a runaway chemical reaction generated uncontrollable internal pressure, eventually venting 42 tons of methyl isocyanate into the night air. Because this toxin is significantly heavier than oxygen, it settled near the ground in a dense fog flowing into the homes of thousands of sleeping residents. Exposure caused severe chemical burns to the eyes and lungs, effectively suffocating victims in their beds before they could even understand the danger. This was not an unavoidable accident, but the result of deliberate cuts to safety maintenance in favor of profit margins. The Holodomor in Soviet Ukraine followed a similarly cold logic of political suppression. Stalin utilized the systematic seizure of food to break the cultural resistance of the Ukrainian peasantry. By sealing regional borders and confiscating every available grain of wheat, the state created a calculated man-made famine in the middle of Europe's most fertile land. Millions of people were reduced to a state of extreme biological starvation, where the body is forced to consume its own muscle tissue just to sustain basic life functions. It remains a profound betrayal when the state, designed to protect its citizens, instead utilizes deprivation and hunger as a weapon of total control. The classified. History hides its darkest stains in the basement, smelling of formaldehyde and redacted ink. Behind mid-century iron gates, the state dismantled bodies instead of governing them. Deep within classified annexes, doctors stripped of humanity conducted scientific inquiries that would make a horror director recoil. Prisoners packed into cattle cars traveled over 1,000 miles to specialized units, only to be injected with mere ounces of experimental pathogens to observe biological collapse. These weren't hospitals. They functioned as factories of organized agony, logging victim pain in leather-bound journals. Silence serves as the ultimate disturbance in these records. For decades, governments buried human suffering under layers of national security, treating agony as a proprietary asset. We stare into a moral abyss where data gained from these atrocities on hypothermia or chemical burns was later utilized by the very agencies that condemned the perpetrators. This represents a parasitic exchange of ethics for information. Reading these files reveals the static-choked screams of souls reduced to serial numbers. Our modern safety rests upon a foundation of shredded dignity and cold, clinical cruelty, proving that men in white coats with government clearance keep the most terrifying secrets. Beyond visceral horror, there is a threshold where tragedy ceases to be a story and becomes a biological mutation. When the atomic dawn broke over Hiroshima, the air didn't just heat up, it transformed into a 1,000,000-degree Fahrenheit furnace. Within a 1-mile radius of the hypocenter, the physical world simply ceased to exist. People didn't die in the traditional sense, they were atomized into permanent shadows etched onto stone steps, silhouettes of a final, panicked heartbeat. Those further away faced a reality straight from a Junji Ito nightmare. Their skin didn't burn. It sloughed off in sheets like wet paper, draped over fingers like black rain had melted the very glue of their existence. This grotesque distortion of the human form mirrors the slow-motion horror of the Irish potato famine. Starvation isn't just a lack of food, it is a parasitic consumption of the self. As the body runs out of fuel, it begins to digest its own internal organs, leading to a hollowed-out appearance where the eyes bulge and the skin turns a sickly, translucent gray. In the 1840s, the Irish peasantry became walking skeletons, their mouths stained green from desperate attempts to eat grass. It is a disturbing irony of history. One tragedy is a sudden, blinding flash that erases the body, while the other is a lingering, agonizing crawl, where the body slowly dissolves from the inside out. Both reveal a terrifying truth. Under extreme duress, the human vessel is nothing more than fragile, malleable clay in the hands of a cruel and indifferent fate. The final countdown. Time stretches into a sickening, heavy infinity during the final moments of a massive catastrophe. On September 11th, a blue sky morning fractured into a 102-minute descent into total chaos. At 1,368 feet above the concrete, the air turned into a thick, toxic slurry of jet fuel and pulverized history. We obsess over planes traveling 590 miles per hour, yet the true psychological horror resides in the silent, impossible choices made within stairwells and offices. Thousands of phone calls echoed through the void, voices trembling with a final "I love you," while the structural integrity of their world melted into orange fire. These were digital last rites delivered from a height that no ladder could ever reach, whispered into a phone as the floor grew hot beneath their feet. A similar, crushing countdown began in 2004 when the tide vanished into a deceptive, terrifying silence. For those standing on the beach, the receding water signaled the ocean taking a deep breath before a violent exhaling of death. The shoreline transformed into a psychological trap, drawing the curious toward the exposed seafloor before the wall of water returned to claim them. You have mere seconds to run, but your legs feel anchored by the sheer disbelief of the senses. Every tragedy contains a ticking clock, a vicious rhythm where each second represents a lost chance to survive. We watch these characters unknowingly walk toward the cliff, realizing that once the sequence starts, we are all just helpless observers of our own destruction. The warning. History isn't a straight line. It is a predatory circle waiting for us to grow complacent. In the 14th century, the Black Death didn't just kill, it dismantled the very concept of society. Ships drifted into ports as ghost vessels, manned only by corpses, carrying a flea-borne pathogen that turned a healthy person into a blackened cadaver within hours. We look back at those 200 million deaths with a misplaced sense of modern superiority. We believe our medicine makes us immune. Yet the plague proved that biological reality cares nothing for human progress. It was a historical revenge against overpopulated cities and neglected hygiene, reclaiming millions of acres of untended farmland as the labor force evaporated. Modern pandemics are merely the same monster wearing a new mask. The grim irony is that our global connectivity, the very thing we celebrate, is the perfect highway for our extinction. We have replaced the slow merchant ship with the supersonic jet, allowing a virus to leap across continents before the first patient even coughs. The Black Death was a warning that we chose to treat as a fairy tale. Nature has a way of pruning the species when it grows too arrogant to respect the invisible. We are living in a temporary grace period, ignoring the fact that the next great dying is already incubating in the shadows of our interconnected world. The darkest souls. Forget the monsters in cinema. The most terrifying predator resides behind your own eyes. In 1994, Rwanda became a macabre theater of human depravity, proving a common citizen can transform into a frenzied executioner within a single sunrise. This wasn't a battlefield of soldiers. It functioned as a mass execution carried out with primitive tools, where radio signals were used to coordinate the elimination of neighbors. Within 1 square mile, the concentration of corpses grew so dense it physically altered the soil's chemical makeup. Ordinary men, the very teachers and priests you'd trust with your life, began systematically erasing their neighbors with a clinical, chilling focus. This represents a total moral inversion, a state where the human mind rebrands slaughter as a civic duty. The Holocaust took this raw, primitive hatred and funneled it through a sterile, industrial pipeline. The Nazi regime viewed mass extermination as a mere logistics equation, optimizing the production of death with the cold efficiency of a factory assembly line. At the peak of this organized insanity, crematoria chimneys vomited thousands of pounds of human ash daily, coating the surrounding landscape in a haunting gray soot. This reveals the disturbing hardware of the soul, our innate capacity to strip a fellow human of their name and reduce them to a processed unit. These perpetrators weren't devils from the abyss. They functioned as attentive fathers and brothers who played with their infants after a long shift operating gas chambers. Evil requires no supernatural summon. It only needs a compliant bureaucracy and a collective decision to blink. When the social fabric shreds, the distance between a civilized neighbor and a genocidal monster is a shorter walk than we dare admit. The point of no return. Modern humanity survives on the fragile assumption of permanent stability, a collective delusion that our current comfort is a birthright. We view our power grids, global food chains, and digital archives as eternal fixtures, yet history remains a silent, crowded graveyard of invincible civilizations that thought exactly the same. One catastrophic solar flare or a single coordinated cyber attack could plunge our high-tech world back into a brutal, pre-industrial age within mere weeks. We have spent centuries building an intricate, heavy house of cards, foolishly convinced that height equals strength, ignoring that a taller structure only creates a more violent collapse. The grim truth remains the opposite. Our extreme complexity represents our greatest vulnerability, a spiderweb of dependencies where a failure in one global artery triggers the starvation of billions almost overnight. Our final legacy won't be our philosophy or art, but the radioactive isotopes and plastic layers suffocating the soil. These artifacts will remain lethal for millions of years, long after our names vanish. We have engineered a world where our garbage outlives our greatness. If these cold realities haunt you, subscribe to help us keep exploring these shadows. Thank you for staying through the darkness with me. If everything we've built dissolved tomorrow, what would truly remain of our species? Are we a civilization of depth, or just a group of clever survivors waiting for the lights to go out forever?